Hello, everybody. It's Michael Hollands once again for Sound of the Movies. Today I have the pleasure to be joined by Emmy winning composer Charles Bernstein. On today's episode, we will focus on the 40th anniversary of A Nightmare on Elm Street. It is my pleasure to welcome Mr. Charles Bernstein.
Hi, thank you.
It's great to have you on my show. Thank you very much for taking a time out of your schedule to join me today, Charles. And 40 years ago, it's really unbelievable that the film came out that long ago. And it was an exciting time in Hollywood. The 80s was a fantastic decade and lots of great films, lots of great music, either film music or pop music, rock music in general. I've always been a big fan of this decade. In terms of Nightmare on Elm Street, was there a specific score you had written prior to Nightmare which caught the attention of either New Line or Wes Craven at the time?
Michael, first of all, I'm very happy to be here and talk to you about Elm Street and so forth. There's a lot in that question. And I want to take a piece of it that you mentioned first off, and that's the era, the 80s, the mid 1980s. Then remember the other parts of the question and ask me those, but I'll first respond to your that era. I think people don't quite understand how pivotal it was. We started the 1980s in one way of working on film music. We came out of the 80s in a completely different way. By way, I mean we had a digital revolution. I did Elm Street right here where I'm sitting, in this exact spot, in this exact room. But the room at that time didn't look like this. This is pre digital, the height of the digital revolution that I'm talking about. Hardware was the only way to do anything. It wasn't a software world. And so this room was filled with hardware, synthesizers, guitar pedals to run the synthesizers through analog tape. It was just a different kind of world. When I started writing film music, I came right in at the high point of the old way of doing things. We wrote with a pencil and paper. My tools were pencil, paper, eraser, big, erasers were a big part of the craft of writing music, a metronome and a stopwatch, and a slide rule, which was a mathematical device for helping to figure out the relationship between footage of film and time and tempo. So it was like a real hands-on world where all the heavy lifting had to be done by the composer, all the math to make it sync with it was just that kind of world. So you mentioning that the 80s were pivotal, I just wanted to underline how very pivotal it was for those of us writing music. Most of us were adapting to the new technology around that time. And I think the Nightmare on Elm Street was probably the first film I did completely in this room. I wrote all the music here. I played personally all the music, every note. I engineered every note. I programmed every, sequence or anything that was going on. So that was not the way we worked until, for me, Elm Street. I did a couple of movies where I dipped my toe into that, where I did some, it was hybrid. I do some live orchestra and some synthetic here. But Elm Street was 100% home recorded, and there were budgetary reasons and other reasons really why it turned out that way. So I just wanted to tackle that part of your question. Now you can remind me where you went from there.
The second part, yes, was there a specific score prior to Nightmare which caught the attention of the New Line people or Wes Craven? Yeah.
Yeah, that's really a good question. I hadn't thought about, why I got hired. but I did do, I think I had done Cujo, if I'm not mistaken,
Right,
already.
right.
And I did the sequel to Rosemary's Baby, which was a television sequel, but it was called Look What's Happened to Rosemary's Baby. I think in 19, God, considerably earlier. I think it was 1976 or something like that. If I'm maybe I could be wrong about the date, but it's easy to check that. I had done enough horror that I think they felt, well, let's take a look at him. Let's talk, or listen to his music and so forth. So I think I had a little bit of a background that maybe helped out.
And of course, filmmaking is all about collaboration. And of course, you need to write the music, you need to discuss the music with the filmmakers or even potentially the studio and department heads and whoever is in charge and willing to offer their input and opinion. So, how would, let's say, Wes Craven and Robert Shaye and also Sara Risher
Mhm.
offer their inputs and discuss what you wrote?
Well, Bob Shaye and Sarah Risher, I believe, were fairly new to the game. There was no New Line Films as an established studio, so it was really a very independent thing. I think they were very early, both of them in their careers, maybe even first big picture, I don't know. Again, something that one can check. But my sense of it was because Wes was an established name. He was the bankable name in this thing. All the cast. I mean, Johnny Depp was unknown, and nobody in the cast would be having any kind of sway. Whereas Wes, he was the power of this hiring and this film. But I was a result of a meeting with Wes and myself. And that was set up by my agent at the time. And I think it was, I remember my agent saying to me, I think you should meet this guy. You've done some horror and so forth, and he's a horror guy. And I didn't know who Wes was. I mean, that's how not deeply into horror I was at that time. Now, over the years, I've learned that of all the movies I've done, and I've done at least 130 feature length movies, that's a lot of, people that I've had to work for over the years. Um, I would say that out of all the movies I've done, maybe a half dozen are horror movies of any, recognition. But it's those movies that have endured. There are not a lot of things I've done that 40 years later we're still talking about it. And I've done better movies and I've written better music, quote unquote, But the horror fans and the horror genre it's a very enduring and loyal fan base. So interestingly, I still, do screenings, Q&As and such, maybe about Cujo, about The Entity. There's still a lot of interest in The Entity, Sid Fury's movie. Uh, Louis Teague did Cujo, Wes Craven's movie. I mean, these are a long time ago, and they're still a subject of interest to a lot of people. So anyway, long answer to a more direct question.
Yeah. And a good answer. Thank you, Charles. And yes, that was kind of the or Nightmare was a big part of New Line's inception,
Yeah.
and they also had, if I recall correctly, some issues raising the money, and
Yes.
I think Smart Egg Pictures was also involved. But think of the scope, and of course now we have the benefit of hindsight. But imagine back then, I don't think anybody would have guessed that or how successful Nightmare may become, and how many sequels it may spawn. Um,
Yeah.
and the influence it had on the genre. And I
Mhm.
think Nightmare in particular stands out not only as a piece of 80s filmmaking, but as a pivotal moment of horror movies also.
Yeah. Yeah, it was remarkable in a lot of ways, but I have to be honest with you. I did not know that at the time. I thought, oh, gee, this is probably going to go directly to home video. I don't think this is going to get a theatrical release. I resonated with certain things in the movie, and I thought, well, that's me. I didn't think it would be a popular movie. I also there were places in the movie. I've said this before, uh, but I was playing the work print of the movie here in this room, and I remember I was scoring that scene where uh, Freddie calls um, Nancy. Freddy Krueger calls on the phone, and he says, "Nancy, I'm your boyfriend now." Ha 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 ha! And he laughs, and a plastic tongue darts out of this phone. And I just hit pause on the tape machine, and that I was watching the printout, and I said, "Oh man, are you kidding me?" You know, a plastic tongue coming out of the phone. That this movie's going straight to home video. But yeah, I and a lot of people didn't catch how popular it would become. But I did appreciate the surreal aspect of it. There were parts of it, and I said this to Wes, that reminded me of Eight and a Half, one of my favorite movies of all time, Federico Fellini's Eight and a Half. I've seen it countless times, dozens and dozens and dozens of times on the big screen. Just, I was so taken with it. And the similarity between Eight and a Half and Nightmare on Elm Street, there aren't a lot of similarities, but there is one. And that is the movement from quote unquote reality to dream, reality to memory, where you're not always sure at the beginning of a scene whether you're actually watching something that's happening in quote unquote, again, real time, or whether you're watching something that's totally subjective to Mastriani in Eight and a Half. And that's the case with this. You're, things are happening. You're in a classroom, for instance, and that's in real time. And then you see this body bag, this weird stuff going on, and you say, oh, wait a minute, maybe this is in her dream. And she started in the classroom. Turns out she falls asleep on her desk and then goes into a dream, brings the audience with her without signaling that it's a dream, like boom, dream starts here. So you're swept into the dream, and then you go back and say, oh, yeah, at some point this reality shifted. So that was an element that it had in common with a movie that I really appreciated. And I think Wes and I connected on that level where we could refer to Fellini, if you will, rather than, he was a very smart guy, and he was easy to work with. We kind of spoke the same language.
The scene with Nancy falling asleep in the classroom, I think is one of
Mhm.
my favorite scenes of the film, and also when she spots her friend in the body bag, and then
Yeah,
I mean, and also in terms of considering how, or let me rephrase, the absence of money can be, of course, a curse and a blessing. Because imagine how imaginative and how resourceful the filmmakers had to be back in the time due to the
yeah,
absence of money to really pull it off. Considering how low budget it was, I think some of the many effects in this film are simply spectacular. Also, given
yeah,
the fact that it was done 40 years ago. Well,
yeah. I agree. Some of the special effects, the blood shooting up out of the bed was actually a upside down camera, and the it was actually coming and gravity was pulling it down, whereas it looks like from the, I mean, it really, along the lines of what you're saying, really creative use of the limitations that they faced. I faced financial limitations because the music budget was so small that I chose to do it here alone. I would much prefer, I would much have preferred to hire an orchestra and do it in a studio, but the budget was just so small that I thought, you know what, this is the kind of score I can do here more easily than I could a big romantic epic movie of some kind. So uh, that was part of the decision-making process. I want to pick up on another aspect of what you said about limitation being the friend of creativity rather than the enemy, uh, uh, the mother of invention, as they say. Uh, I think in the case of the music, the 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 sense of limiting it, like what I had to work with, was very useful in creating a style, a language, a musical environment that if I was in the orchestral studio with violins and clarinet, you know, the traditional instruments, I think uh, being limited helped me create a musical voice for this particular movie and many others. I find limitation. I wrote a book uh, that was based on actually yet to publish the third of this series of essays about film music. And one of the essays was called Limitation. I think I wrote this back in the 90s. Um, and I talk about how when you have too many choices, it it doesn't foster the same process of creativity. And I worked a little bit with some AI. Someone might be seeing our discussion enough in the future that this may sound old because AI is moving so quickly, artificial intelligence. But I started to notice that if AI has a creative problem, and as a creative person, I can recognize creative problems at the point that I'm dealing right now, it seemed to me that AI wasn't limited enough. In other words, it could calculate so many creative possibilities that the issue seemed to be how to narrow it down. Like, what is the process by which you filter? And it made me think about my creative process and how I have to filter down from, oh, I have so many choices. I could have orchestra, I could have synthesizers, I could have stylistic this and that, you know. And there's something uh, that maybe AI can, you know, adapt to this problem, and it probably will. But as of this particular moment in this particular field of film music, it just kind of struck me that it has too many and too many terrific options, and that part of a creative person's toolbox is how to get down to that one choice that will work best. And to do it from billions of choices is really a tall order. I don't have billions in my head, and a computer does. So that may be one of the interesting human versus generative AI. Just a side point.
Thank you. And speaking of books, you have released two books so far, right?
Yeah. Let me explain. I've been writing a quarterly article for the Society of Composers and Lyricists for 30, maybe 35 years. I don't know, a very long time. And they add up. So I had about 30 of them at some point, and I published a first book. And then after another number of years, I published a second book, you know, kind of a sequel of the same. Each chapter is a article from this professional news magazine now. And then I've written so many since then that I decided to put everything into one book. And it would be the collected essays. And I've got that, but I can't, I'm still writing these articles. Apropos of our discussion today, a few months ago, my article was called Monsters. And it was about how important Freddy Krueger is a monster by definition, how important monsters are to humanity. They actually have a function. I mean, people don't go to see Nightmare on Elm Street randomly. There's a need. They want to experience Freddy's world. And so, anyway, writing music for monsters is a particular kind of thing. This was a recent one. So, what I'm just saying is there's a chapter like that about this and that and the other thing, including monsters and so forth. And I've got about 130 of these chapters. So, I thought I'd take the first two books, add in this huge number of more recent essays, and we'll just have one rather thick book of about 130 chapters of, essays. But I don't have time to be messing with it right now. But, one of these days, maybe soon, I'll just bite the bullet and put it together.
And how would you describe the skill set and the talent of director Wes Craven?
Yeah, Wes, when people think about someone like Wes, I think they underestimate how smart you have to be to do what he does. Uh, Comedy, I think you have to be the smartest to do comedy. Comedy is really hard. Uh, but Wes brings comedic elements in. We did a movie together called Deadly Friend,
Yes.
which had a lot of really Hitchcockian kind of humor in the direction and in the writing. There were a lot of things wrong with this movie that have been documented and talked about, which are nothing to do with Wes, just the studio wanting more blood and, that kind of thing. But anyway, yeah, Wes used to be a teacher, used to be in, I think a college level teaching. He's really smart. He's well acquainted with literature, with the genre, and I think those tools, along with his intuition, his like a record producer is to music, he has this kind of sense of what to do, what would work right now at this moment in time. He had a terrific sense of that. So when you take his intelligence, his kind of awareness of society and what people are wanting to experience, and the intellectual chops to put it together, and the energy and understanding of film, you put all those ingredients together, and I think you get Wes Craven.
As I think he has directed terrific pictures. I think, of course, Nightmare is one of my favorites. Obviously, Scream, and
Yeah,
and I have to tell you, of course, even films like Red Eye, which I don't think many people would normally associate with the Wes Craven or Music from the Heart, which it did with
yeah, yeah.
Meryl
Very
Streep.
unusual. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
Beautiful.
yeah. And one of my favorites of his is The Serpent and the Rainbow.
Yeah, do you know about the situation musically with that?
I know that Brad Fiedel had about 2 weeks, 3 weeks,
Yeah,
maybe, if I
yeah.
recall correctly. Yeah, to write the
Well,
score.
here's the musical situation. They first hired. I wish I really knew the particulars. I don't know their names, but he hired a couple of composers right off the bat. I think they wrote a good score, but for some reason, the company didn't want to go with it. Then they hired a really talented guy, uh, um, Olatunji. He's an African drummer, and he wrote a score, which also was pretty terrific. And they didn't want to use that. I mean, this is unusual. So that's two entire scores, two compo, teams that wrote. And then Wes convinced them, well, let's check out Charles. So I came in and started to sketch some stuff. And at some point, the producer in the studio said, now let's go for a fourth. And then Brad came in. And Brad always does a terrific job. I know him. He lives up the coast, here. Haven't seen him in a long time, but anyway, and Brad comes in and does an excellent score too. So it's the fourth out of four scores, and there wasn't much time left, and my heart went out to him. But there seemed to be a lot of uncertainty. I've never been on a picture where there was that much uncertainty about what to do musically, and in fighting, conflict about it. Um, the score that I wrote, I put a lot into it, and it's now been released this year on Perseverance Records, Rob Esterheimer's label, and so fans can hear what my contribution was. I think it would be nice to have all the scores to that, because I'm sure that all four of them had something interesting to offer. So it is available to listen to, and you know it's again something Wes did that's kind of not in the usual bent. It was geographically interesting down in the Caribbean, and yeah,
And Haiti, yes, and
yeah,
but your score has been released officially?
yes. Yes, it's called the unused score from Serpent and the Rainbow, but that's not the name of the album. I think the name of the album is a series about forgotten treasures, and there's some name for the series.
Right.
I noticed that I was able to find it on Spotify. It pops up, but I'm not sure. I'd have to look and see what the name is. But anyway, there's that score can be heard. And there's some in my opinion, some very powerful music in there, unlike anything I've actually done before.
I did not recall all of that. Thank you for also refreshing my memory. I did talk to Brad about also the Serpent and the Rainbow, but that was must have been 4 years ago, 5 years ago. So I'm not sure how detailed the conversation about Serpent was, but I do recall there was a lot of pressure, yes, and I seem to
Yeah.
recall others not making it through the finish line. Yes, yes.
Yeah, yeah. I don't think I've ever heard of or been involved with a project that was that volatile with regard to the music.
Yeah.
Usually, maybe there'll be a real disagreement with a composer who took a direction with a score, and they'll say, okay, we're going to have to start over again. But to do it four times right up to the finish line, and they could have, I think, gotten any score out of me for sure. But Wes was not calling the shot. You know what I mean? There was something going on that I couldn't quite feel what was needed and what was happening. So just let it happen.
Okay. Um, but that's not a common thing to have three rejected scores and then actually then going with the fourth one. And I think sometimes it can be frustrating because not everybody can verbalize what they feel is wrong with the
Yeah,
approach. I
yeah,
think that can be a major pain in the ass, pardon my
yeah,
French, for many composers or for many filmmakers in general. Let's say a director thinks, well, I've done something which is really cooking here, and then somebody, from the studio says, no, I,
yeah,
I don't think it works. I can't tell you why, but I don't think it works.
yeah.
Yeah.
You bring up the question of how do composers and directors communicate with each other? The importance of that issue of communication. And usually it's not how much to communicate or how well to communicate. It's sometimes how to stay out of the way. Really great directors part of their talent, the way I see it, is getting out of the actor's way. Giving them what they need to do what they need to do, and get out of the cinematographer's way. You have a Haskell Wexler, or you have this or this Storaro. How to give them the framework to do what they do best. And I can always feel it when I'm working with a director. Uh, I don't need them to be super articulate or talk a lot. I just need them to guide me if I'm veering away from where they want their picture to be headed, to kind of offer support, but not co-composing. That you want to, with an actor, you don't want to give them too much information. You want to just give them enough. And I think that's one of the great directorial skills. Wes had that skill. I don't think he was able to practice it in this particular film. I don't think like I said, on Elm Street, he was the boss. There was no one he had to, well, I'm sure he had to talk to Sara and Bob, but he was the respected voice, and there wasn't a lot of, I didn't feel a lot of stress going on between him and whatever else was happening. So anyway, yeah.
And I'm sure, yes, Serpent must have been complicated. I mean, that was a universal release at the time. Again, it's a very atmospheric picture, and I think despite the difficulty, I think one of his best.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with you. And a courageous movie, it was unique. The movie, it wasn't a typical horror. It wasn't a typical location kind of thing. I think he, tested some new ground there. And again, it does point to Wes's courage and vision and willingness to take on something completely different, like he did with One from the Heart. Is it called One from the Heart?
I think is it Music from the Heart? Is it one?
Music from the Heart. Yeah, Music from the Heart. Yeah, totally out of his usual realm, but just wonderful.
Serpent and the Rainbow aside, you had worked with him on Nightmare and also Deadly Friends. Have you ever tried to, let's say, team up again? Because after those pictures, you really haven't collaborated again, right?
No, you know what? I think there was, after Serpent, our, you know what I mean? It was such an unpleasant experience for him, for me, from my point of view. I just think, it was one of those moments where we stayed very friendly, very much in touch. I never held him accountable or responsible for any of the difficult, stuff going on around that picture. And toward the end of his life, he sent me the most lovely email telling me how much Elm Street, the music, contributed to what Elm Street became, and how appreciative he was of it. And it was just a very sweet thing. So there was no awkwardness between me and Wes as a result of that. But I think New Line also kind of liked this idea initially of not doing what most franchises do, like don't do the music more than one, have every one of them be completely different, at least up to a point. I think they were following that kind of thought, which worked for them apparently. But I don't think they rehired Wes, to do stuff in the franchise. I think it was.
Well, Wes ultimately would return full time for the new Nightmare, which was
Yeah, but that's kind of the after all the one, two,
yeah.
three, four, yeah.
Yeah. Well, they had many different. First of all, many different composers. I mean, Chris Young. Chris Young scored the second one. They had Angelo Badalamenti, Craig Safan, Shaye
Peter Robinson.
Shaye Peter Robinson. Yes, absolutely. Brian May was also one of the composers. So there was a big variety, and they changed directors.
Yeah,
Chuck Russell, Rennie Harlan.
yeah.
Yeah,
I think that was all part of a thought of let's keep, going somewhere new with each one. Let's not bring anything, too much back from stylistically from the earlier ones. I had a meeting with Rennie Harlan about the possibility of doing that nightmare, but whatever the decisions were at that point, I think New Line was definitely changing it up, not going back.
Steve. I forgot to mention Stephen Hopkins. He directed number five. They probably didn't know about the potential sequel when
Yeah,
Nightmare
yeah,
One, when you scored Nightmare One. But did
yeah.
they, apart from Rennie Harlan, was it ever a thought that had occurred to them to rehire you for the second one? Did they even approach you about this, or
No, I think from right off the bat,
yeah,
they have had this, let's not use Wes, let's, keep using different directors.
yeah.
I think the beginning of the franchise looked that way to me. Um, I think there were a few composers, certainly Craig's, Safin and Peter Robinson, actually contacted me and said, "Oh, we're going to use your theme. We really like it," and they kind of brought it back in. But I think they weren't even like when Chris came on board. I think they didn't want anything from one in the music of two, of Nightmare Two, and it was kind of that way up until maybe Peter or Craig said, "Well, gee, you've got this theme," and so.
When do you know that you're actually in good hands with a director and also a studio?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Pretty quick. You know, the second there's an issue, um, there's, I think I could almost categorize there's certain styles of directing and certain styles of producing. And then there's kind of whose pick were you? Were you picked by the director and the producer had someone else and they lost the fight? Or were you picked by the producer and the director's best friend who did all his movies before got pushed aside? Sometimes you walk in and the situation is already awkward and it's nothing to do with you. So, but you kind of quickly get the sense of it. And the truth is, every single composer wants to do his or her best, wants to do a great job. Nobody's going in saying, I want to do it my way. Everybody's there as part of a team. And good producers and good directors tap into that desire to do the best score possible for the film. Not the best music ever written. That's not the name of the game. The name of our task is to give the movie the best score for telling that story and making that movie as powerful and effective as it can possibly be. So yeah, I often know early on, and then of course the question is, what do you do when you realize you've just set sail and the captain's drunk or the crew is just gotten picked up and they've never sailed before or something. Uh, that's kind of a horrible feeling where you're already adrift and you've got the crew and the captain that you got, and you just have to get to the other side of the voyage intact and try to do your job. So
And are you aware of the new 4K UHD version of Nightmare on Elm Street, which was released
when was that released?
just a couple of weeks ago? For the
Oh
first,
no.
yeah, for the first time ever, they released in the United States the original unrated version of the film, because Wes had to trim a couple of images and just a few seconds here and there for
Oh,
the theatrical version, and then there was
uh-huh.
the R-rated Blu-ray version.
Hmm.
And now, for the first time ever, the unrated version is available on 4K even. So, which
Oh,
is exciting. Yeah.
well, Elm Street did a DVD release, feels like 10 or more years ago,
Or yeah.
where they went back to my original multi-track tapes and repositioned the music for surround. And for instance, I'll give you an example. The opening of the movie, Freddy's making his glove down in the basement with a little hammer and
Mhm.
tools. It starts on a small screen with a lot of black around it. And you see Freddy in this sort of prequel moment preparing his deadly weapon. And the music is mono in this mix until it goes widescreen and there's a big kind of synthesizer, kind of big sound, and it goes into surround at that point. And I'd never heard it that way. I heard it in a screening room at LA Film School, I think it was, and it was really exciting, And I think that, with the remixed music on the soundtrack of the film itself, was really a big step forward from the original version. So I'm assuming this is probably based on that.
I have yet to unpack it actually, the new version. I'm looking forward to watching it again. And sometimes it's so weird how also censorship works, for instance, because some countries actually had the uncut version on VHS, and then for some reason that became kind of obscure. And yeah, it's unbelievable. The German VHS actually was completely unrated in the 80s, and then it never made its way to Blu-ray and DVD, and now it was rediscovered and finally released. So that's crazy.
Wow. So it's available here in the US?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I should maybe go online and have that. I have a movie that I did that was released in Germany and Europe, actually everywhere, I think, but the United States, with my score. And the US version was distributed with Michel Legrand's score. That was one of those things where I replaced, uh, uh, you know, as we were talking about Serpent and the Rainbow. So it's available in Germany. It was the last movie made by the actor Steve McQueen. It was called The Hunter. It's about a bounty hunter. And I wrote this kind of, very masculine, kind of rhythmic score. And of course, Michel, who's one of the greatest composers who ever lived, wrote this thing and brought in a lot of opera recordings. It was really cool. But anyway, yeah, sometimes we work on things and they end up in different distribution areas with different scores, this being one of those cases.
Yeah, or Legend, Jerry Goldsmith, for instance.
Yeah, yeah.
K2, Hans Zimmer versus Chess Shankel, Shankel. Yeah,
I've never heard that one. Yeah, yeah.
yeah. The many of the European DVDs still feature the opening credit music by Jazz Shankel, but the majority actually was rescored by Hans and also Nick Lenny Smith. Yeah, yeah,
Interesting.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah. So, it gets complicated sometimes.
yeah. Or White Fang, Hans and Basil Polidorus.
Basil. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah. Also a kind of complicated
yeah.
story. Do you recall how many versions of the main theme existed?
We're talking about Elm Street.
Yeah, Elm Street. Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah, yeah. One of the record companies, I think it was Entrada, released the score, and I gave them a bunch of sketches, and you can hear different choices that I was thinking about making with the theme. It's a 10-note theme. Da da dee da 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 is the 10 notes. And where it goes from there and how it's harmonized, I did it in a few different ways and I'd forgotten about it. And then I found these old sketches, and I think it's on that album where they play some of the old sketches. And I apparently felt, is often the case with film music, that I needed to abbreviate the theme so that I could get the whole theme into certain places in the film. It was a more expansive way. Originally, I wrote it a little more where it takes longer to state the all the notes in the thematic development. So yeah, yeah, it there were several uh,
Yeah, yeah.
renditions. And because it was recorded here by me, I still have the recordings of those sketches, whereas if it was just on paper, it would never have made it to the musicians on the recording stage. So
Wow. And we did talk about the low budget nature of the film, but
yeah,
how compressed was your schedule actually having to write the music?
yeah. It was short, and they hadn't shot the end scene, or if they had, they hadn't cut it into the film yet. They were still arguing about how to end Elm Street when I was working. So yeah, I'll just say the number. I had 20,000 to work with and 15,000, I'm sorry, 20,000 total budget, which is nothing, to hire musicians and produce a score. That's the entire music budget. Um, and 25% of it disappeared from the start. So my initial $5,000 to kind of get the ball rolling never got to me. So I only had 15 to work with, and they eventually found another five, and eventually I had the 20. But even for a shoestring budget, there was a big chunk of it that was missing from the beginning. So I was under a lot of pressure from time and money. And that was just something that, as I say, in some ways worked to our advantage, but definitely made my life difficult.
The isn't there a specific story behind the missing money with the music supervisor? Wasn't something going
Yeah,
on
yeah,
there?
yeah. The guy who allegedly received the $5,000 was not reachable. I don't know if he went down to Mexico or he traveled there. I don't know what happened there. But the guy that was supposedly the middleman, I said, oh, they said, you're going to get your 5,000 to get started. I can't emphasize how minuscule that amount of money, even then, when money bought a lot more. But he did disappear. But eventually, either he came back with the money or they came up with some new money. I don't know, that part of it. But the first thing I did was I went to West LA Music, a store on Santa Monica Boulevard, and I bought a TAC 8-track half-inch recorder. I set it up over here, and I striped one of the channels with SEMPTI code to sync it to. So I just set up like a little makeshift recording studio here. As I say, pre-digital. This was all analog stuff. But the computers were now transitioning into the digital world. So anyway, yeah, that there was more of a story there that I don't even know about the money.
Last question. What's next for you, actually?
I did a few movies in the last couple of years that I've really enjoyed. Uh, I don't know what the distribution is going to be for them, which is out of my domain. But I'm going to post both scores on, they'll be on Spotify and I guess, Apple Music and so forth. Uh, One of them is currently titled Bigger Than Art. So, two of the most talented, wonderful Spanish filmmakers making a feature-length documentary, gorgeous film about art. From caves, the cave paintings, to all the current, most current and future leaning stuff. And I was able to write music for all the great works of art, Hieronymus Bosch's Garden of Earthly Delights and Goya's paintings and etchings, the war etching, all of these incredible artworks. It's just one of the most enjoy. it was kind of an opportunity when there's monsters there too, like Freddy Krueger, but they're the monsters of Goya, the monsters of Hieronymus Bosch, these great works of art where the dark forces are there. It was just a delicious thing. So I'm just mixing an album right now, so I'm gonna try to get that up. And I did a similarly interesting feature-length movie out of New York called The Land of the Mustaches, about a refugee family back in World War II in the Baltics. And, it was just very touching, seen through the eyes of a little girl in this family that's displaced and all that. So kind of a sensitive score. So these are not distributed right now and difficult. They're not like doing Elm Street where you've got this huge international audience. So I would say I'm doing, in that sense, smaller projects, more satisfying just lately. And who knows what, things just come out of the blue. So,
Is there anything else you would like to add before we wrap up for today?
No, Michael, it's been a total pleasure talking to you. I wish you great luck with the series you're doing and appreciation for our chat together.
Great. Thank you very much for taking your time. I really appreciate that. I really enjoyed the conversation. I'm glad you liked it too. And
Mhm.
stay safe, stay healthy, and let's talk soon.
And you too. Thank you. Bye
Take
bye.
care. Bye.